Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to draw a pumpkin leaf and acorn. I actually have that still I've set up right over there. I just snapped a photo of it, so I'll be able to upload that, put it on either on Instagram or my blog so that you guys can see it. And we're going to sketch that. And I'm going to start with a Col Erase color pencil. You can also use a watercolor pencil or a regular pencil. And I'm going to draw a big circle to represent the pumpkin. I want that to fill up a good portion of the space here. Since it's a light colored pumpkin, it's going to have less visual weight than the leaf and the acorn, so I want it to take up a little bit more space. Even though it is a bigger thing, it's lighter in color, so I'm going to have that take up a big area of space here, and then I'm going to have the oak leaf kind of come up over here. I'm actually I'll draw kind of like an overarching oval or almond shape just to kind of represent the leaf and get the gesture in. And then I will go in and add some detail, okay? So this is kind of by request. I had a lot of people ask about doing a leaf in watercolor after we did the marker leaf the other day, so I thought I would go ahead and do this right here on YouTube for everyone as part of Watercolor Wednesday. I love Watercolor Wednesday, don't you? So there's one side of the leaf. We're going to do it again over here. Oh, this one is a really cool little twirl. I just picked this up in my yard right before I began here. I like to get fresh leaves whenever possible. Now we got this acorn, which is actually kind of on top of the leaf a little bit, so I'm going to draw a circle with a kind of a flat top here. Just get that little acorn based in. Now when I draw, I'm not a big fan of gimmicks. I like to draw what I see. That's how I teach drawing versus gimmicks. So just want to let you know that in case you're, in case you're interested, because people often will ask for recommendations. I do have a course called Learn to Draw with Lindsay, and it is drawing what you see. Which, I like that because I feel like it works for everything instead of like everything being lined up perfectly for it to fit into a, a perspective lesson or whatnot. All right, so now we've got our basic oak leaf, we've got our pumpkin. Now on the top of the pumpkin we've got our stem, because we're kind of looking down at it where I have it set up on my table, and I'm kind of looking down because it's just off the edge. That's how I love to draw things like that. So like when you're at the grocery store, you're going to notice, well, actually I can't say that for sure. Maybe it's not the same everywhere in the country or in the world, but there's a lot of like decorative gourds out for sale and pumpkins and things. They're all in season up here. Like you can go to pumpkin patches and pick pumpkins and whatnot. So I really like to just kind of set stuff up on my table and just draw it. Now as we kind of come out from the stem, all of these lines are coming out from the stem kind of like longitude lines, or would it be latitude? The vertical ones on a globe. It's kind of like that. And then as you bring it out to the bottom part of your circle, you're going to notice it's going to come back in. You're going to have like almost like a scalloped edge there. So keep that in mind as you're drawing. You want these nice funky chunky ribs on the pumpkin. And they're not all going to be perfectly even. They're going to be organic. I wonder if I should sneak another one in there. I'm not sure. And I am drawing this darker than you probably would want to, especially if you're using a pencil. You know what? This is going to come in a little bit more, I think. Oh, good. The pencil eraser. I'm never so sure about the pencil erasers on these, if they're going to be good or not. I feel like I need to sneak a couple more in the back. So I'm just going to lighten those up. The reason I use a Col Erase is because I don't know, I like the look of those lines when they come, as they come back. I'm sneaking another one in there. I like the look of the pencil lines. I like to use a soft brush rather than my hand to brush away the crumbs, because I always worry that I'll get oils from my hand, my skin, on the paper, and then when I go to watercolor, it's going to give me problems. The stem is actually very geometric looking. All right, now if you want to do any other details such as veining, you can. That's up to you. You might want to do your veining, if you're going to do veining, with a pale colored pencil, because that can help you, actually can help resist some of the paint. I noticed in the 150 set of Prismacolor pencils that I have, the veins are offset too on these, that there's more pastel colors than there was in the previous. Like, I had got the 144 set back in like the late 90s or early 2000s. It was right when Rubbermaid, I think, took over Prismacolor. And they were still made in the USA. And I noticed they have added some light pastel colors. I think they might have removed some of the neon colors, but I really like the pastel colors, because I like to blend out with pastels. All right, so I think we're pretty much set to start our painting. I'm going to use my Turner watercolors today. You can use whatever you like. I have mine right in a tin here. And I'll just let you know what colors I'm using as I use them. You can see my mixing area, but I think I'll just have the palette itself out of screen, because that way you'll have more room to see the picture that I'm working on. I think it's a little bit more important to see. I think I would like to do a background on this. I'm going to make sure my tape's all pressed down. It's going to be a very faint background, but I think I will actually wet the whole paper. You can do this with a spray bottle if you like. The reason I like to do this is because I feel like sometimes when you're looking at a picture, and they put the background in afterwards, or they just wet the background and put the background in that way. Sometimes you get this cut and pasted look, and I don't really care for that much. I prefer things to look a little bit more natural and organic, but if you prefer more of a collage look or a crisper look, you can do that. It's totally up to you. I'm going to keep the background really light though. I'm going to start with some, you can probably guess, I bet you're sitting at home going, she's going to say yellow ochre, she's going to say yellow ochre. Yeah, I'm going to start with some yellow ochre. Why not? Oh, I could start with Naples yellow, but yellow ochre is good. I can really water it down. Just want to, and I can put that by putting yellow ochre over the entire thing. Oh, I think I grabbed some medium yellow. I just want yellow ochre. By doing yellow ochre over the entire thing, it's going to give it like that kind of fall warmth, and there's nothing here that is going to be harmed by having a wash of yellow ochre on it. Very, very light. Okay, and then I think I'll grab some burnt umber and some ultramarine. Oh, and so good. I just refilled these the other day, so it's they're nice and full. My nice full pans. Add some of that to the bottom. I'm just going to wisp it in. Now this is a cotton watercolor paper card. These are the new 100% cotton watercolor cards from Arteza. Arteza has had some really good prices on these on their website. They've had 50 cards and envelopes for like $24 or $25. I don't know how long that sale's going to be on for. I don't even know if it's still on. I'll have to check. But I really like these, and because on Amazon they have one box of 25 for the same price. So you get like twice for your money over on the Arteza website. So I will link that up down below, so you can grab that if you want it. I want to also get some colors added. I want to do a little bit of a non-traditional color here. I think I want to do some of a rose red. I know it's more pinky, not what you would expect for fall, but I think I kind of want just that little bit of surprise and freshness. And I think I'm going to spatter some of that on there as well, which will give us a little texture in the background. We might even get a little cauliflowering from that. Gives it kind of a little bit of a magical effect. I think I'll also do a little turquoise. This is a cobalt-based turquoise that's in the Turner set. It does not look like your traditional cobalt teal though. It's got more of a, it's almost got more of a cerulean undertone to it. You can see how you can get like little cauliflowers. If you don't like that, you can blot them up at this point. And I think I'll also take some of that golden yellow New Gamboge color, I believe. And flick some of that on as well. Now if there's any places where you don't want that, you can go ahead and blot. Or if you've got puddles and you don't want the puddles, you can blot those as well. I just want there to be a little bit of contrast when I take the tape off. When I'm done, I just think that's a really pretty effect. Now, if I want to maybe add a little bit more shadow under the pumpkin, what I can do is I can kind of wipe up some of the extra paint there. And on the edge of the leaf too, just going in with a dry brush and just lifting up some of that paint. And that way I can go in and I can paint a little more shadow into that wet paint down below, and it can flow out but not flow up into the main subject that much. So burnt umber. You know, I'm going to do this with the round brush actually. Round number, I think I got number 8 here. No, number 10. Doesn't matter. Anywhere in that realm. Ultramarine. And now I don't want to use a lot of water here because I just want enough to be able to pull it off the pan, because I want that kind of paste paint that will just kind of stay where I put it and not venture out too much. But I do want a little bit of a softness, so if I do this on the damp paper, it's going to soften out a little bit. I guess I could use a little bit more water than that. But I can avoid that cut and paste edges by having the paper damp and the paint on my brush less wet than what's on the paper. That's how you can control a wet into wet application. And there is a bit of timing involved, so if you get streaks, you know what, you can just go in and re-wet it and just smooth it out that way. I'm trying to kind of play that, get that balance of just a little bit of blending, just dry enough so that it doesn't spread where I don't want it to, but wet enough so I don't get the streaks. And it's kind of a tricky balance, but it's kind of fun as well. There's a little bit of, I'm wondering if I just want to maybe smooth it just a little bit with a damp brush. There we go. You got to be careful because it will want to lift. That's another reason I like working on the cards, because you don't have to worry so much. I mean, it's not even in your sketchbook where you're going to see it. You're probably going to like mail it off to somebody. So it doesn't have to be like hung on a wall, or you don't have to fret about it, basically. You can just enjoy it. A little bit more pigment up here. Okay, then you gotta leave it alone, which is the hardest thing because you just want to mess with it. I'm gonna tap it. It'll help settle out the pigments a little bit and make them kind of flatten out a little bit and smooth out a little bit. Okay, so now I'm gonna start working on the pumpkin. It's not completely dry, but I think we're gonna be all right. I'm gonna take some yellow. Actually, you know what? Let's take some Naples yellow. That would actually be really pretty. Some Naples yellow, which is a kind of like a pastel yellow ochre. I'm gonna put some of that up here in the highlight areas of the pumpkin. And on the stem. Now I'm going to grab a little yellow ochre on that same brush. I'm going to add it into the stem as well, because there is a very strong kind of straw yellow color in there. Now I'm going to grab same dirty brush, some ultramarine. That's going to give me a gray, olivey, undertoned color. Add that in the stem. It's going to give me a nice shadow too. It's going to give me a very murky color, but that's what I want. Adding a little bit of burnt sienna to darken it, and maybe just a smidgen of sap green. Tapping it off because I don't want too much on there. Okay. I want to show you my palette for a second. I use a mixture of half pans and full pans in my palette. So the colors I use a lot that I want to be able to go in with a big brush, I have in full pans. So that would be burnt sienna, burnt umber, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, cobalt turquoise, phthalo blue, viridian, or actually phthalo green, yellow ochre, all three of my main yellows, and all four of my reds. So these other ones like olive green, true viridian, dioxazine violet, those colors that I don't use very often, those are in half pans because I'm probably only going to grab a little smidgen on a small brush. I'm not going to be grabbing that much of it. So think about that when you're working. How much are you going to, when you're laying out your palette, how much of that color are you actually going to want? I'm going to add some of that rose red to my pumpkin. Mainly because I'm still swooning over a pumpkin that I saw at the grocery store, but it had a gouge in it. And it was one of those Cinderella type pumpkins, and it had that very, very pale pink coloring to it, and it was so beautiful. I'm still mourning the loss of that pumpkin. And I'm going to grab some Pyrrole Scarlet. The Pyrrole Scarlet is, and you can use any sort of like warmer red. Try to find something that's a little bit more transparent. I'm going to kind of grab that, help define my edges very, very subtly, because this is a white pumpkin, so I only want undertones, really. All fall coloring does not have to be super bold. Now I'm going to grab some of that turquoise color. My brush didn't have a lot of paint on it, so I'm just grabbing it as is, and I want a subtlety, and I want that blending. I don't like the cut and pasted look, personally. And I am bringing some of that in from the bottom of the pumpkins and just kind of wisping it up. I have not dried my paper. My paper is in actually just a kind of a damp state. But because it's cotton paper and my brush, I'm making sure my brush isn't too wet. I'm not getting feathered edges and bleeding problems with my paint. If you are, then just go ahead and zap it with a hairdryer or a heat tool. If you're working on like a cellulose paper or a sketchbook or like the Strathmore watercolor cards, which, hey, I like those too. Not as much as these, but I like those too, and I use those for years. You might want to stop and dry because the way the cellulose papers are sized, it almost feels like they've got more of an external sizing on them, and they can cause your paint to want to cauliflower on you and stuff. All right. I know I'm going to want a darker value at the bottom of the pumpkin, but I don't think I want to charge in with that quite yet. I think I'm going to go and work on the leaf now, so I'm just wiping my brush off. I'm going to start off with this gamboge or Indian yellow, whatever you have for kind of a warm, transparent yellow. Cadmium yellow is a little bit more murky, so I'm putting this kind of in the center. Now I'm going to grab some of the Pyrrole Scarlet. I didn't clean my brush because it's yellow on my brush. It's not going to hurt anything. A little bit of, you know what, I think I'm going to go with some burnt sienna, even though I already used burnt umber. Because I want that richer, I'm just going to, yeah, I think that's dry enough. I should be able to keep a nice crisp line. I am just going in and getting the edges of these leaves. Still using the number 10 round because it has such a nice point. These are from the signature set, my signature set with Jerry's Artorama. I'm not sure if they're in stock right now, but I did find out that they are shipping to Canada. They just started shipping to Canada again last week because there was so many restrictions and things were so expensive during the pandemic that there's finally, I guess they finally lifted restrictions on American imports to Canada, or at least lifted whatever they had for a restriction. So that's nice. I'll be a little bit more fast and loose with how many colors I'll use in a card too versus a painting. I'm not, I don't necessarily hold myself to any hard rules, especially in cards. I do tend to mix more than grab a new color anyway, but I'll also experiment a little bit more when it comes to cards. I'm going to take the Scarlet, the Burnt Sienna, and some of the Rose Red this time. Ooh, that's vibrant. I think that'll be pretty. I like to pump up the color a little bit more than what I see in real life too. Sometimes with watercolor especially, and it wouldn't really be an issue with other paints because you're not really thinning them down with water. But the more water you add to a color, you can affect the light fastness. So some colors that are light fast and full strength, and they'd be perfectly fine in acrylics, and oil paints will become fugitive in watercolor if they're really thinned down. Not that that's really that big of a deal with a card. I mean, I wouldn't expect somebody to keep my cards forever. But that's another thing to think of when you're thinning down a paint. It could be actually with acrylics, if you're mixing it with a lot of white, you could be stretching out the pigment particles enough that they're getting less less compact and more diffused, and therefore less protected. But they also get that nice acrylic binder on it, or oil binder, so they're not left as vulnerable as they would be in watercolor. This is a very meditative process. I'm going to grab a little bit of ultramarine here. Need to purple up this color a bit. It's also a great brush control project because you're using this big brush on the small painting. That's a nice color. It's almost like an eggplanty color. So I haven't pre-wet anything here other than just putting that yellow down, so we're not going to get a lot of flow. You're going to be able to control exactly where your stuff is going. I do have to be careful in the shadow that I just put in because it's probably a little bit wetter than the rest of the paper. I am going around some of the veins if I can. Actually, the shadow feels pretty dry already. I'm surprised. The humidity is nice and low in my basement now. I usually have to run a dehumidifier, but the last few days it's been dry enough that I don't even have to run that at all. Okay, now I am going to clean my brush. I'm going to go for some sap green. You could do olive, and I'm going to just add a little bit of yellow to that. And now I'm going to kind of bridge the gap between the yellow and the green, and the yellow and the red rather, sorry. And pull some of that color in. This is such a fun little card, don't you think? Way down to the stem. And you can kind of see how like those lines that we drew with have kind of just become part of the painting, and they're not problematic. They look good. Now I'm just kind of integrating all those colors together with some brush strokes, because the red is still a little wet, so I can manipulate it a little bit. I like to have that kind of like movement in the leaf. All right, now if there's any puddles, just kind of dry your brush off and pick them up so you don't end up with any cauliflowers where you don't want them. I'm going to add a little bit more red right here though. I feel like I get a little outlining happening. Sometimes that happens when you're just kind of working an area and then all the pigment gets pushed to the edge, and that's often not what you want. There, I kind of like that. I don't want to work on the acorn yet. I am going to let the leaf dry. I'm I'm going to start adding a little bit of detail to the stem, and we can start on that with a small brush. I'm going to just grab a little bit of burnt umber, because I've already used it, and I'll mix it in with the burnt sienna and a little bit of the ultramarine blue. And I'm just going to tap around the perimeter of the top of the stem where it was cut, and then just drag down some little lines. And then I can add a little bit of a shadow right where it meets the pumpkin on the front side. Just give it some nice texture. You want that kind of woody texture. You can even tap a little bit on the top of the stem where it's been cut, and you can see the pores. I'm going to add a little bit of blue to that. I see this kind of like a very, very faint blue in there. I can add a little bit of yellow as well. It's not a bright green, so don't paint it bright green. I mean, I guess you can paint it whatever you want, but I'm trying to keep it a little bit realistic. Now we're going to start adding some shadow in the ribs of the pumpkin. I'm going to grab some ultramarine blue, grab a little bit of our mix from the leaf, grab some of the turquoise, a little more of the orange, a little more of the turquoise, so cool it down without making it strong. There, I've got kind of like a gray purpley color here. And oh, my stomach is growling. I'm ready for lunch. I'm going to start adding in some of the shadows. I think I'll start with lines. So I'm kind of doing the lines where I drew my drawing lines, and then I'm going to fill in at the bottom a little bit, and then, I think I'll grab a second brush to blend with. So I'll grab a number 12 round, whatever you have. Could be an 8, could be a 12, and just kind of wet it and squeeze off the excess with your finger, and then just blend it so you get that nice transition. Try not to drop any paint on your painting. I dropped a drop on the leaf and I had to blot it off before it created a cauliflower. The brush is just slightly damp. The blending brush is. It's a great exercise in subtle blending. Now we work around this way because the light's kind of behind it, so we're getting more shadow on the opposite side, which is a little bit weird, I know. I'm going to blot that a little bit. Gotta clean my blending brush, clean it and blot it. Did I drop any? I'm getting drops over here. I'm like just being careful I don't drop it where I don't mean to. I'm going to go over here to this rib. So do you understand what I mean? The light is coming, like if my stuff is sitting right in front of me and the light is behind it, light is coming in here, so it's affecting where the shadows are. The shadow is going to fall on this section now. I hope that makes sense. Maybe I should redo the shadow there because it got really light because I had to blot some where it spilled over. Oh my gosh, I don't know if you can hear my stomach. I hope not. It's like really growling. It says, your breakfast oatmeal has worn off, lady. We need something more substantial. I've got some more stronger shadows in here. And we're going to pull that up there so it just kind of fades. Yeah, it just kind of fades off up there and gets a little bit stronger down here just to soften the edge. Sometimes I think it's easier to paint the shadow a little higher than you want it, and then so when you go to soften it you don't wipe too much of it away. But you can see how that one especially really adds some depth and dimension. I'm rinsing my brush and blotting it again. And back in with some more of that lovely purpley color. So very little up top, then more as we work down. Darkest in the divot between the ribs. And we're layering this over. We put some, we had put that turquoise down earlier, wet into wet, and we're layering over that. It kind of helps you realize where the shadows are going to go. So people often ask me, how do you paint white things? And you paint them by kind of looking for the other tones and exaggerating what you see as far as your lighter tones. Need to make it a little bit darker. I'm going to grab a little bit more of that that orangey color and some burnt sienna and some turquoise. Let's see if that's dark enough. I can always go with ultramarine blue if I need a little bit darker. Here we're probably one of the furthest spots away from the light source. So we're going to have probably some dark on either side. This one's going to get dark around both edges, actually. I need to mix up a little bit stronger color. I don't have enough. So we've got the turquoise, we got our orangey color, got a burnt sienna or burnt umber, maybe a smidgen of ultramarine just to get a little bit darker. And let's put that in like that. Right now, maybe add a little bit more there too. Make sure I pinch out any extra moisture. I think I might actually just kind of wet that beyond and go back in with some more pigment because I'm feeling that it's a little streaky. I don't like the streaky. If I have enough streaks though, wisp it up like this because you can see little, you can see the texture of the pumpkin skin. It's got like a little bit of ridges that go up between the ribs. So if you're gonna have some of that texture, you might as well have it accurate. I'm just gonna soften it a little bit. Could go a little bit darker over there too. I think it's kind of difficult on a white object because you don't want to overdo it and then have it not look white anymore. But you've also got that, you want it to have enough shading and impact so that it, so that it has form and looks good. All right, so that still appears to be a white pumpkin, even though we've got, we've obviously got colors on it. I'm debating whether I think I'm going to need a little more shadow underneath it, so I think I'll hold off putting any more color on there for now. I think I'm going to switch to a smaller brush for the leaf. let's do a number 6 round. I have not given my watercolor brushes a good wash in some time. I probably ought to do that. I'm going to do the Scarlet. I'm going to do a little bit of Rose. I'm going to do some Burnt Sienna. And I'm going to do some Ultramarine Blue. So I'm going to end up with a rusty eggplant color. And I am just going to go in and just add a little bit more color here and there. I like to use expressive strokes when I do this. I know it's not perfectly realistic, but I feel like it makes the leaf look fresh and alive. It's kind of a decorative painting technique, to be honest. It almost is like the strokes you use if you were rose modeling. But I'm using it in a less organized way. I just feel like it gives it a nice, I don't know, swoosh. Just watch that your brush isn't too wet. I like this number 6 round Creative Mark Mimic. It's in the signature set that I have with Jerry's. You can also purchase it open stock. I like it because it's got long bristles, but it comes to a nice point, so I can get lots of like thin lines. It carries a good amount of paint. Now I'm doing those same strokes, but kind of working up into the reds. That's why I'm turning my paper. I just have a card taped down to a piece of cardboard that's just a little bit bigger. This was from the back of a pad of paper, so it probably has some buffering in it, I would think, versus just like, cardboard from a box. So if you're going to work on something like a card, you're not going to be working on over days and days typically, but if you were working on something where you were going to spend a long time on it, I would suggest that you use foam core or something or maybe cover a piece of cardboard with contact paper or something, so you're not going to be having it against an acidy surface for a long period of time. So now I'm doing some Naples yellow on my Acorn here. I'm going to grab some yellow ochre now, and I'm going to add that next to the Naples. So this is going to help give it a rounded effect, hopefully. Now I'm going to grab some burnt umber. I haven't cleaned my brush. I'm working off dry paint from tubes that are dried in my palette. And I just have to be careful because I might have some wet paint next to that. Oh my gosh. My stomach, guys, I really hope I am not I hope that's not coming off on camera. I don't know why my stomach's growling so much. It says it's 11:07. It's time for lunch. I eat lunch early because I usually eat breakfast pretty early. Although I didn't today. I did eat breakfast, but it wasn't that early. Okay. Paint around the little cap, around the little stem. Gonna grab a little more Naples. Add a little bit of highlight on the cap. Gonna mix burnt umber and ultramarine to make a nice dark for the little stem on top of the cap. Make sure you don't have any beads of water on the ferrule of your brush, because if that slides down when you're doing something fine like that, it's gonna cause a problem. This is probably the darkest value area of the piece. I'm gonna put a little bit under there. I want a little definition between the cap and the nut of the acorn. And I'm just, I just kind of want to suggest the pattern that's in the cap without going really detailed with it. So I'm just doing some cross hatching. And I think I'll add some of that just on the bottom of the nut as well. I feel like this is really lopsided. I feel like I need to make the cap bigger or something. It's not quite there. It's not quite right. Well, there's always colored pencils, right, friends? All right, oh, we also have a shadow on the leaf from the acorn. Add a little more blue to that. And that can help us define the acorn as well. And then I'm going to add some shadow on the surface of the paper as well. That will help quite a bit in defining. And then I want to add more shadow for these elements as well. So ultramarine blue, burnt umber. I'm not fastidious about cleaning my palette while I'm working because I feel like when it grabs from different elements of the painting, I just end up with a much more cohesive shadow. I get better darks. I get darks that make sense because you've got the local color incorporated, and I just feel like it gives me a much more natural effect. I'm going to blend out with this a little bit. Your shadows are darkest and crispest, most crisp up and near the object being shadowed, and it fades out as it gets further away. So I'm going to fade that out. It's almost like you get two shadows. You have a soft shadow that kind of fades out from the object, and then you've got a stronger shadow that's right up against the object. And sometimes it takes a few layers to get it exactly the way you want it. All right, I'm going to do a little more ultramarine into that mix. And I'm just going to get this shadow between the two a little bit darker. And right under the acorn a little darker, and just a little darker directly under the side of the leaf. Okay. I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to decide if I want to darken the pumpkin anymore, and then we'll pretty much be done. Okay, this is dry. Something I think I need to do now is add a little bit of more shadow in the center, because you do get a little bit of light bounce on the bottom. So I don't think that should be any lighter at the bottom, but I think the shadow right in the center of the rib should be a little bit darker. I'm going to take some of the turquoise, some of the orange, and mix it in with some of that burnt umber and ultramarine blue shadow, so I get it a little bit darker. And what I'm going to do is kind of put that right in where I think it should be a little bit darker. And I'm going to try to just kind of do it without having to blend too much. I might have to go soften it a little bit with a damp brush, but I'm just going to try to just kind of baste it in here. It's kind of the mid shadow. You get the reflected light on the bottom of the pumpkin from the surface of the table. And that can also give me a little bit of the texture of the ribbed little ridges on the pumpkin skin. And I also feel like, I'll let that dry because I also feel like I might want to splash a little bit of like more yellowy colors in there. I want to make a purple. I'm going to take the ultramarine blue and some of the scarlet. I don't want a strong purple. I want that, you know, that eggplant color. A bit more of that scarlet. And I'm just going to add some of that into my leaf. Just little streaks of it. Oak leaves are not like the real bright, vibrant leaves. In fact, this one, they kind of go golden. So it's weird to catch one with this much red on it. It's because it hasn't completely turned. It goes from a green leaf to kind of like an olive green colored leaf. Then you get this point where it's bright like this, and then it goes right to gold, kind of like a brown gold color, like yellow ochre. But I thought this was a really pretty transition color, and I really want to maximize it. So now I'm going to do the same thing with just the sap green on its own. Make sure I got it loaded up well with no clumps. I'm going to turn my work, and I'm just going to pull some of that brighter color in. Okay, now I'm going to grab actually some Naples yellow. I want to mix some Naples yellow with some sap green. I think the Naples yellow might be opaque enough that I could actually get some veining in there. And let's see, I'm not sure if it is or not. I might need to use like a colored pencil. Oh, you know what? It might be. So that Naples yellow, and you don't want to put a lot of water in it. I like Naples yellow a lot, especially for like sand and surf, like beachy ocean, tropical ocean. Any place I have a sandy area, I really like that. I'm going to grab a little of that color and add it onto my acorn as well, just to kind of flesh it out. And, oh, I can take some of that color and add it on the stem, too. And then for a final touch, what I think I'm going to do is just grab some yellow ochre, maybe a little Naples, and just kind of splash on some looser color on the skin of the pumpkin. Oh, it could take a little green actually. We got a little bit of reflected color up from the leaf there. Could even do a little bit of that leaf color being bounced. I like to make sure I have some looser, juicier strokes when I'm doing this. I don't like things to look fussy, especially on a card. Things can get fussy. We've spent quite a bit of time on this, and I'll get a little bit of shadow kind of where the pumpkin dips in here too. So sometimes if something feels a little too tight, people always say, how do I loosen up? Sometimes, you know, you just got to go in and put some loose strokes at the end, which can be scary if you put a lot of time into something. But, you know, it's important you get a look you're happy with. And there's no reason not to experiment with a card, right? I want a little bit, I don't like all the strokes over here, so I'm going to put a little bit in there too. It's also important to not overwork it, and I kind of feel myself just wanting to play, so I've got to be careful. I'm putting some turquoise in there. I like the turquoise because it's a nice contrast from the color of the leaf. And I'm going to do some spatter, which I know not everybody likes, but you don't have to do the spatter if you don't like it. And maybe a little bit of green spatter, the sap. It's a great way to use up some of the color on your palette if you're like, oh, I wish I had more of that color in there. And then before you dry it, you can blot anything you're not so crazy about. If you want to lighten up a spatter, you can go ahead and blot it now. Okay, I'm just gonna blast this real quick with the heat tool, and then we can take our tape off and see what we have. And of course, you can add more details with colored pencil if you want to. That is completely up to you. And you could add more details with a pen as well. You're not going to hurt anything by going in with a pen. I wouldn't go in with a Sharpie. I would go in with like a Micron or a water-based pen because a Sharpie will seep through to the inside of your card, this being a green card, and also will often get really dark because it is any of your alcohol-based markers just look a lot darker. Now you can save, we didn't get a lot of paint on the tape, you can save that tape and use it on your next card. So keep that in mind. I like to also take the tape off right after I dry it with the heat tool because it makes the tape easier to remove, although I haven't had any issues with these cards ripping at all. But there you have it. There's our finished card. I think it came out really cute. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you give this a try. And until next time, happy crafting!